Shadowlands is such an interesting expansion, as it represents Blizzard tearing down everything that's been built up over the past few expansions, and starting fresh, laying a new foundation for the game. Not just in terms of story and lore, but also in terms of gameplay and rewards. Shadowlands gets a lot right, but it also gets a lot wrong, and how this expansion is received by the WoW community at large is going to massively impact the way World of Warcraft continues to evolve. Shadowlands is an experiment, and there is so much to talk about. So let's get right into it and try to figure out what works, what doesn't, and why. The first thing I noticed about Shadowlands is that it feels far better to play than BFA ever did. I haven't played every class yet in this expansion, but so far I've heard nothing but praise for how classes play, and speaking from my own experience, I love the changes that were made to Unholy DK. I'm still very disappointed that we didn't get Summon Gargoyle baseline, but I'll live. Epidemic was finally made baseline, plus some of the new and returning talents are great, such as Unholy Blight. On top of the really good changes to the core of most classes, I also think the Covenant abilities really help to make the game feel better to play. Granted, they are hit or miss, but on the whole, Covenant abilities are really interesting and fun to use. Abomination Limb, otherwise known as Slappy Hands, is just so much fun to use, and when combined with the core changes to Unholy, it's led me to just loving my class this time around. Getting the gameplay right is so important, and I am glad that Shadowlands got this right as it sets the rest of the expansion up for success. This is a World of Warcraft expansion, so I think it goes without saying that the zones and the music are outstanding. These zones are absolutely some of the best zones the game has ever seen. They're fantastical and crazy, and that might put some people off, but I love it when World of Warcraft goes high fantasy. That's the reason I love Outland to this day. Even though newer zones have better textures, Zangor Marsh is still one of my all-time favorite zones, just because of how alien it feels. Back to Shadowlands, Ardenweald is probably the most beautiful zone ever put into this game. While its denizens can be nightmare-inducing, the zone itself is stunning. Maldraxxus feels like Eastern Plaguelands dialed up to 11, with a massive statue of the Primus towering over the zone. Ravendreth uses its imposing architecture to make you feel tiny and insignificant as you look up at the grandeur of Castle Nathria, and Bastion is an idealistic paradise based on the fields of Elysium in Greek mythology. Each zone feels entirely different to the others, and God, I love them all. The Maw and Oribos are the main letdowns on this front. They're still great, but they just aren't as great. Oribos is fine, but it isn't nearly as cool as some of the previous hubs we've had. Oribos just doesn't hold a candle to cities like Dalaran or Shatrath. The Maw looks pretty cool, not exactly my cup of tea, but still cool. The main issue with the Maw is the gameplay around it, which makes me dread going to the Maw, and not because it's scary, but because it's annoying. We'll get to that. The music here is also pretty great. It isn't as catchy as BFA's music, at least not to me, but it does an incredible job of building ambience. That's why I still haven't turned my music off yet for this expansion, especially in Ravendreth. The questing in Shadowlands is also pretty great. While I don't think it lives up to the same levels that WoD reached with its questing, it's still really fun with some really fun and interesting stories. I've done it 4 times so far, and I'm not sick of it yet. We'll see how I feel after getting 20 alts up. The questing is pretty much what you've come to expect from modern WoW questing, and Shadowlands doesn't reinvent the wheel here, but it doesn't need to. It does use in-game cinematics to great effect during questing, but we'll talk about that more later. All in all, the questing is well worth your time. With that said, let's talk about in-game. The world content in Shadowlands, it's not good. It consists of world quests and Maw dailies. The world quests aren't bad, and in fact they try to be longer and more interesting than those in BFA, and while sometimes that works, other times it just doesn't, and at the end of the day, world quests are not enough to be the main form of world content. Like, come on, Blizz. How many times do we have to have this conversation? Look at Mechagon, look at Nazjatar, and look at how they use world quests along with dailies and other types of content to make the zone feel varied and interesting. You've gotten it right before, just stop leaning so heavily on world quests. World quests are great, but they can't be the only form of world content in a zone, or else the zone is gonna feel hollow. I do appreciate that we can complete callings by doing dungeons and the like, but it's still not great. The reputations also suck, because they've just been tied to world quests again. The reputations have no personality, just like in BFA and Legion. The Covenants have personality, but the reps do not. Somehow, the Maw is even worse. I get they wanted to make it feel dangerous and scary, but it's not. It's just annoying. Taking away ground mounts was an awful call. It's not fun or dangerous, it's just arduous and frustrating. The same applies to dropping half of your currency when you die. It's just annoying. By far my least favorite part of the Maw is the Eye of the Jailer. Again, I get the idea. As you do more stuff in the zone, the Jailer sends more forces after you. It's meant to make the zone feel threatening. However, that isn't the effect it has. When I'm in the Maw, I just do my dailies and get out, because if I run around doing side content, killing everywhere I see, and exploring, the Eye is going to make doing the content I actually came to the Maw to do far more aggravating. At best, the system is ignored, and at worst, it actively discourages gameplay. It's just stupid and unnecessary. You know, I think that kind of describes the Maw as a whole. From the way the beta developed, it seems rather obvious that Blizzard put the Maw on the back burner and tried to throw something together at the last minute, because there's no way this is what the developers envisioned the Maw being. The dailies in the Maw are alright as far as dailies go, but they're just dragged down by the design of the zone itself. Once I decided I wasn't going to raid seriously this expansion, I stopped doing the Maw altogether, and I think that's very telling. Covenants are actually good. They all have a distinct personality, and they give you goals to work towards. I've always enjoyed having a base to upgrade, and I'm really having a good time upgrading my Covenant Sanctum. It gives you stuff to spend anima on, and I really like this aspect of the game. It gives you a sense that you're always working towards something. The special activities for each Covenant seem pretty cool. I've only done the Maldraxxus one so far, but I really like the Abomination building. Except for Chorty's quest. Screw this guy, he is the worst. You send him around to go dig stuff up, except he never finds anything. It's not fun, and it takes ages to get done. The other quests aren't like that though. Overall, it's just a fun side thing to do. Granted, the world content is so easy the abominations are rather useless, but it's fun nonetheless. The other Covenant activities seem fun, but since I haven't played them, I can't say for sure. The mission table also counts as content, I guess. They did a whole redesign of the mission table to try and add more strategy. You now get to place your followers on a board, and their positions relative to the enemies and other allies impacts how they perform in the mission. But it's still not very fun. I'm very neutral on the mission table at this point. I honestly just don't really care. I fail to see what having this feature adds to the game, but it's whatever. The main Covenant feature is the campaign. I've only finished the Maldraxxus campaign so far, and I enjoyed it. It didn't blow my mind or anything, but it was fun enough. I really liked unlocking the story through Renown, until I started trying to do the other campaigns on my alts. I don't care about gearing up my Druid and getting Renown. I just want to do the story, and it seems like I actually have to do some real content or get lucky with callings in order to unlock the campaign, which I don't love. It was fine on my main, but I really dislike that on alts. From what I've seen, the Maldraxxus story seems to be the worst, which, if that's the case, then I can't wait to see what the other campaigns have in store, as I had a good time with the Maldraxxus one. I really like Blizzard releasing new story content as the game progresses, rather than just front-loading it all. While I still think Mists did it better by tying the stories to reputations, the content here is still quite good. Torghast was supposed to be something incredible, but unfortunately, it's become my least favorite feature of Shadowlands. Torghast has loads of cool ideas, but it doesn't embrace any of them and is held back by the very nature of World of Warcraft. Inspired by roguelikes, Torghast was meant to give players an entirely different experience each time they played. As the player climbed the tower, they would collect new powers that would alter their gameplay. Each floor would be filled with random enemies that the player would have to overcome, and as the player climbs higher, the tower would get more and more treacherous. It sounds cool, but it fails on almost every level, becoming a slog to get through each week. The big mistake they made with Torghast was tying player power to it, and not providing many cool cosmetic rewards to work towards. The main reason to do Torghast is to get Soul Ash in order to craft legendaries, which, surprisingly enough, is really important to how your character performs. By tying player power to this content, you've made it a requirement for anyone who wants to get the most out of their character. That wouldn't be a huge deal if the content wasn't really bad. Torghast fundamentally fails at delivering different experiences each time you enter. It doesn't take too many runs of Torghast to realize that the layout of the floors has very little variation, and floors all start to feel the same. The different wings do feel distinct from one another, but they too end up feeling repetitive after your first time through. This isn't aided by the enemies in the tower either. Initially, Torghast was tuned to be quite challenging, but after Backlash, it was nerfed into the ground. While I agree with this change, it made Torghast really easy to complete. There is an issue with random content in World of Warcraft. It simply doesn't work. Why are raids and dungeons fun? I'd argue it's because it pits you and your team against a well-tuned encounter that you work together to overcome. If a boss is too easy, it's boring, and if it's too hard, it's horrible and not a fun experience at all. Over the years, as WoW's player base has continued to expand, Blizzard has added numerous difficulty levels so players can find the level that works for them and get a great experience with whatever content they want to do. The few times that challenging solo content has existed, it's also been finely tuned and tailored to the spec that was meant to take on that challenge. Point being, challenging content is only fun when tuned appropriately, which is why something like Torghast doesn't work. Blizzard can't balance something like that for every single spec in the game, including all of their different roles, especially when you add in the randomness. So there are really only two options. 1. Make it challenging, being aware that that challenge will more often than not be unfair and unfun. As a monk, you might be able to dodge ground effects with ease, but as a Death Knight, if you have too many enemies that use ground effects, you simply won't be able to dodge them all, because you just don't have enough mobility. Or maybe an enemy deals a lot of raw damage. A DK might be able to survive that, but a monk couldn't due to being less tanky. It will always be unbalanced for someone, and that's without mentioning melee versus ranged, or DPS versus healer. The second option would be to make it stupidly easy, which defeats the purpose of making it random, because if it's all easy, it doesn't really matter what enemies you're fighting, as you can just mow them all down. World of Warcraft is a numbers game, with 12 different classes split up into 36 specs. The way this was implemented was never going to work, so why was this system getting so much praise from content creators leading up to launch? Because Blizzard dramatically changed the way the system functioned before launch, and they made several horrible mistakes that culminated in Torghast's potential being completely destroyed. Mainly that they made climb shorter at only 6 levels. You see, it used to be way more open-ended. As the beta testers climbed higher, they got more and more powers and became ridiculously powerful by stacking effects. This meant that Torghast was easy, but the fun came from the crazy builds you could make. However, in the live version of the game, this aspect of Torghast has been gutted. Because you can only climb 6 levels, the number of powers you can acquire is limited, and if you ever feel like your build is starting to come together, then the run's probably almost over. Now that Torghast is easy and you don't get to make crazy builds, the entire appeal of the feature is gone, and the main reason to do it is to get Soul Ash, which makes it a chore, and then you realize just how long Torghast is. While the climbs are far shorter than they were before, they're boring now, and it becomes painful to go from floor to floor, because there is nothing interesting happening. Not to mention that the only challenging part of Torghast is the final boss of the layer, which means you can waste around 30 minutes to an hour preparing for that final fight, only to lose and have to start all over. While this never happened to me, I can only imagine the frustration. Twisting corridors is slightly better as you climb more floors and accumulate more powers, but it isn't enough to get me to want to return to Torghast. This, just like the Maw, is content that I actively stopped participating in once I decided not to raid, and again, I think that says a lot. I realize this was a bit of a tangent, but it's just frustrating, because this feature has so much potential, and it's just been squandered. Honestly, I think I'd rather do island expeditions. And I hate island expeditions, but at least they're over faster, and you can just do some crazy AoE. I didn't expect Shadowlands to make me miss islands in any capacity, but here we are. Well, that's a lot of the negatives out of the way, which means we can finally talk about some of the positives, at least for the moment. The dungeons in Raid are both excellent. The dungeons feel varied and have tons of interesting fights. They all have mechanics that are easy to understand and fun to deal with. And the trash mobs aren't nearly as annoying this time around. At the moment, there isn't a single dungeon that I don't like, which is more than I could say for BFA. The Castle Nathria raid is also fantastic. Once again, the fights are varied and fun with a focus on impactful mechanics, and I really appreciate how normal and heroic are not complete pushovers this time. Also, the theme of Castle Nathria is just incredible. All in all, Blizzard has knocked dungeons and raids out of the park, which isn't entirely unexpected, but it is appreciated. The content in Shadowlands is a mixed bag to say the least. The dungeons and raids are great, but main features like Torghast completely fail. The zones and music are incredible, but the world content is dull and uninspired. There's enough content here to build a really strong expansion, so let's look at how power progression and rewards are structured. Power progression is vital to the long-term success of any expansion. BFA failed miserably in that department, and because of that, Shadowlands has turned everything on its head and pivoted on core design philosophies. Shadowlands removes a lot of the fluff from previous expansions, like artifact power and titan forging. However, to accommodate this, the entire game has been rebalanced, and I think it's safe to say that Blizzard didn't exactly get it right. The philosophies governing the decisions are great, and I'm so happy we're moving in this direction. But Blizzard missed the mark on this first attempt. We already know that changes are coming to the system, so hopefully what I say here is going to be outdated by 9.1 and everything will be fixed, but while we're here, let's talk about what we have. The lack of Titan forging has made gear feel far more meaningful this expansion. Upgrades feel like upgrades again, and getting best in slot is now something that the player can work towards, which is great. I vastly prefer this method of gearing to what we had before, where anything could Titan forge and you couldn't realistically finish gearing. Unfortunately, Blizzard has greatly decreased the amount of loot that drops from both dungeons and raids. Now we've gone too far in the other direction. While gear does feel rewarding, you don't get nearly enough of it for it to feel like you're being rewarded for your time, especially in Mythic Plus. You can easily do Mythic Pluses all day and not get any loot, or clear all of Nathria and only get one item. The idea is that you do Mythic Plus, raids, and PvP in order to fill up the Great Vault, which is where most of your high quality rewards will come from. This is clearly an attempt to extend progression, and I get that, but I think that something like the Valor system from the end of WoD would be a much better way to have long-term progression. Increase the drop rate. Let players get good items, and then do more content in order to get a currency in order to upgrade those items. That way, even if you don't get a piece of gear you want, you still get something of value that can improve your character in a tangible way. This gives you long-term progression while still letting players feel rewarded for their time. As it stands, the game just doesn't feel rewarding to play. There seems to be this fear within the WoW dev team that players are just going to drop off if they're able to finish gearing, so they try to make it take a really long time. But I'd pose the question, are you going to lose more people by letting the game have an endpoint, or by driving people away with unrewarding systems? I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure unrewarding gearing systems will drive more people away than finishing gearing, as not that many people would finish gearing even if it was something achievable. Also, that's why cosmetic progression exists. Blizz, just give people more optional stuff to do and stop trying to make the power progression game endless, because all you're doing is shooting yourself in the foot by making the game feel unrewarding. One aspect of the game that I can absolutely praise is the PvP gearing. In fact, the system is nearly flawless as far as I can tell. You get a steady stream of honor or conquest, get gear and upgrade it. It always feels like you're working towards something, and it feels good when you get it. 10 out of 10, great job, Blizz. Too bad I don't like PvP. Legendaries are weird. You have to buy or craft a piece of armor and then infuse it with a legendary effect and some soul ash. I'm not a huge fan of the role crafting plays here because I'm not rich in game and I don't like spending gold. However, I love the choice that comes with this. You can get the ones you want and you have options in terms of what armor slot it fills. The main negative for me with the system is that the legendary doesn't feel that cool or special like the ones in the past did. Maybe if you had to collect reagents from the raid or something that could help. I don't know, just getting my first legendary was just really underwhelming. I hate that you have to do Torghast to get Soul Ash for reasons we have already discussed, but all in all, I think the system is pretty good. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. So those are the major forms of power progression. Let's talk about the minor forms. Renown is your Covenant progression, and it's pretty alright. You progress 2 to 3 levels a week and unlock some rewards for each level. There isn't too much to say on this one, it's fairly inoffensive and forgettable. However, I do really appreciate the fact that all of your rewards are clearly laid out from the get-go. It is unfortunate that increasing the item level of World Quest rewards is locked behind this progression. This effectively kills gearing up through World Quest, as by the time you've unlocked that high item level World Quest gear, it'll be entirely irrelevant to you. One of your main Renown unlocks will be new slots for your Soulbinds. Soulbinds are just, they're really dull. The effects are so minor and boring that I don't really care, and for someone that I bound my soul to, I really don't feel attached to the Soulbind characters at all. I don't understand why Blizzard felt the need to add an unnecessary and rather pointless talent tree here. It was probably just to pad out some Renown unlocks and add conduit rewards all over the place. Soulbinds just don't really add anything, and I don't understand why a system like this made it to life. It's not broken or anything, like it works, but it's just one of those things where you could remove it and the expansion would be better off for it. Professions are pretty standard fare this expansion. You no longer have random rank upgrades, which is great. In fact, they ditched the whole star ranking system altogether. Professions are heavily involved with crafting legendaries, which gives them far more relevance. They also introduced more consumables like oils or grinding stones. I'm pretty neutral on their inclusion. I suppose it gives professions more relevance, but it's fairly minor. The removal of RNG does make leveling up professions feel better, which is nice, but it's still just professions. If you like professions, you'll probably like them here. On a bit of a side note, I do really wish there was a better way for casuals to get a good set of starting gear, like Benthic gear or something like that. It seems like there really isn't a structure for those players besides waiting on Renown to get better World Quest rewards and maybe upgrading Covenant armor, but that costs anima, so if you care about upgrading your Sanctum or buying cosmetics, which most casual players would, then it's not that worth it. The most controversial thing about Shadowlands has easily been the Covenant abilities, and the imbalance that they cause between Covenants. For a vast majority of the player base, this isn't really an issue, it's more of a perceived issue, but for those who raid PvP or Mythic Plus at high levels, it absolutely has to suck. I personally don't really mind it, as Maldraxxus just worked out for me. It's the Covenant I wanted to join, and it has the coolest ability. I think this issue is blown out of proportion very often, but I definitely understand why high-end players really dislike it. Overall, power progression is in a really weird spot this expansion. Hopefully they can rectify a lot of these issues as the expansion goes on, but only time will tell. Obviously this power progression is better than what we had in BFA, but that's a low bar. I think we're headed in the right direction, but it might take a while before Blizzard gets the power progression to a point that actually feels good. The transition period may not be very good, but I'm just happy we're transitioning to some new and much improved design philosophies. The cosmetic rewards in Shadowlands are actually pretty great. I mean, they look incredible. The armor is some of the coolest armor in the game, and some of the pets and mounts are awesome. However, the rewards are stretched really thin. Nothing feels like it has as many cosmetic rewards as it should. I think Torghast is the prime example of this. There are some rewards with pets being random drops and the Maw mount dropping from the twisting corridors, but it all feels lackluster. At the moment, there really aren't that many cosmetic rewards I'm dying to get. I'm excited to get the new back pieces, but that's about it. Even in BFA, I once had loads of pets and mounts to work towards, and there's nothing like that here. That isn't helped by the fact that a large number of cosmetics require you to be a part of a specific covenant. I think this will get a lot better with whatever content we get in 9.1, but for the moment, it just feels like they don't have enough rewards to spread across all the content they added to the game. But they did add the Acolyte's Guise toy, which lets you look like this, so all's forgiven. On to story. Surprisingly, as someone who isn't that invested in the World of Warcraft story, I've really enjoyed the story of this expansion. It isn't as emotional or in-depth as BFA's story, at least not yet, but that's never been what WoW was good at. It's cheesy and over the top, but I've really enjoyed it. I appreciate how old characters have returned in minor ways rather than being the sole focus of the story, overshadowing everything else. I love that this expansion is expanding the lore of Warcraft, rather than just continuing down the checklist of things to do from Warcraft 3. That was fun, but I'm so ecstatic to see World of Warcraft doing its own thing again. I loved what they did with Mists, and so far, I love what they're doing with Shadowlands. There are proper mysteries set up, and I'm really interested to see where the story goes. Specifically what Sylvanas is up to with Anduin. My only complaint is that the Jailer isn't a very good villain, he's just kinda meh. But besides that, I love what they're doing with this expansion, and as long as they don't redeem Sylvanas, then I think I'll like what comes next. This is the first time in a long time that I've actually been genuinely interested in the story of the game, and seeing where the lore's going and all that stuff, so that's awesome. Not only is the story really good, so too is the storytelling. The main difference is that in-game cinematics are used way more often and look far better. In BFA, they always came across as awkward and cheap, but here they're fun to watch and aren't too janky. The amount of voice acting has also increased yet again, and all this just means that the story is a lot easier to follow and way more enjoyable to experience. All in all, the story isn't anything incredible, but it's a fun ride that's paving the way for new lore, new stories, and new characters, and I can't wait to see where it's all leading. Throughout this video, I've alluded a few times to the fact that I'm not taking this expansion that seriously, and that I'm not even part of a raid team anymore. And for those of you who know me, you know that's quite the departure from what I was before, as I was a Mythic raider who played this game way too much. I wanted to quickly address what's going on, as it's undoubtedly impacting the way I feel about the game on a personal level. I've tried to separate some of my personal feelings from the objective criticisms I've made, but anyway, if you don't care, feel free to skip to the conclusion, but I'll keep it short. To be honest, my life has changed quite dramatically since BFA. Mainly because my priorities have changed, but also because of some things that happened with online friends that changed my perspective on things. I no longer value World of Warcraft as highly as I once did, mainly because I value my time a lot more now, and taking the game seriously takes up so much time. Every time I log in to do some kind of mundane content like Maw dailies, I always end up thinking about what else I could be doing. Whether it's working on a project, playing a different game. I pretty much decided to drop out of Mythic raiding because I didn't want to commit that much to the game. I tried doing Heroic raiding, but it honestly just isn't that engaging for me anymore, and it isn't worth the time investment. Stuff like Mythic Plus is far more off-putting because I'm just doing the same content over and over and over again. These were things that didn't bother me in high school, but now they do. I just don't feel like dedicating so much of my time to WoW is that worth it anymore. I will always love this game and what it did for me, but I think my days of taking the game seriously are over. I might make a full video on this at some point, but because of my priorities in life changing, playing WoW feels more like wasting time than it did before, and for that reason, I've taken a huge step back from it. While all this is coming to a head in Shadowlands, I really don't think it's the expansion's fault at all. I'm actually really enjoying it. There are parts I really don't like, but on the whole, I'm having a great time with it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It's time for the conclusion. Like I said in the intro, Shadowlands is such an interesting expansion. It clearly is a very mixed bag, and it fails a lot. The content outside of raids and dungeons really isn't that good. Power progression is all over the place, and it's likely to change many times before it works. And the cosmetic rewards are scarce and spread across way too much content. Looking back at this review, you probably think I hate this expansion, but nothing could be further from the truth. While this expansion is a mess of poorly implemented and unrefined ideas, I've had loads of fun with it, and it's heading in the right direction. If Blizzard can course correct ever so slightly, this expansion could easily become one of the best expansions ever made that will have a long-lasting positive impact on the health of the game. All the pieces are there to make a fantastic expansion. The design philosophies are promising, and the core content, i.e. dungeons and raids, are great. But I suppose only time will tell, and I have never been more interested in seeing how an expansion develops and evolves. Until then, I'm gonna have some fun playing Shadowlands. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, Evo here. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. I'm really interested to see what your thoughts on Shadowlands are, because it's really divisive, obviously. If you are interested in some of my variety content, it's stuff I put a lot of effort and time into, and I'm really proud with it. Go check that out if you're interested. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later.